As new forms of communication continue to take the world by storm, it is important for all of us to have a healthy eye of skepticism towards state government authority when it comes to how they interact with people who may be influential or may be up and coming in the digital world. And I think that our skepticism is needed more than ever when we realize that the old influence operations of the past that happened through centralized media institutions that were more easily controllable by the forces of power, whether it be NBC, ABC, CBS, you name it. That's basically all there was back then, but in general, you name it. Well, today, there is just such a vast plethora of places and personalities from which one can extract information, analysis, and thought from. And to government forces that may not mean well, or that may seek to dial up the conversation towards a certain frequency, that is not acceptable. And they must exert as much control, as much power as possible, even if it means undergoing acts of intimidation, even if it means undergoing acts of personal abuse, all to ensure their agenda succeeds. And today, I bring you news on this front, and another example of this unfortunate tendency of governments to behave this way towards citizenry in the story of Lauren Southern. Now, for those of you who do not understand or do not know who she is, I would say you've been under a rock, but in all seriousness, Lauren Southern is perhaps one of the most, I would say, revolutionary journalists, especially like revolutionary independent content creator journalist of the past few years. She's done a lot of good work about what is happening to farmers in South Africa. She has been a consistent voice against the wiles of multiculturalism and forced diversity and the impact those things have on societies and cultures and populations and things of that sort. And she has been so impactful in her work that at one point in time, she was headlining a speaking tour across countries like Australia, where she was selling out entire auditoriums. Well, she recently put out a video where she detailed the abuse she has been facing at the behest of the American and the Australian government, simply for her advocacy over the years and for her friendships with particular people that those two governments happen not to like because of also their ideological orientation. In the video titled Brittany and Martin, which are the two people that were friends of Lauren Southern, that she cannot speak to because the governments of Australia and America have threatened her ability to enter these countries if she spoke to them, she explains the abuse she has faced. She explains the fact that she would get stopped during COVID when she came to visit her family by airport authorities who asked her and questioned her explicitly, "Are you talking to Brittany and Martin, those two people?" She explained how Brittany and Martin, who were connected with this group called Generation Identity, which we'll address in a second, were also labeled as enemies of the state, basically, unofficially, in these countries, and Southern and anyone else by association with them were also considered and treated in the same way. Here are a few excerpts of Southern's heartbreaking, terrifying, and in all honesty, infuriating story that all of you should see.
I have dealt with extreme psychological torment at the hands of the government for being friends with Brittany and Martin. I'd always been on like the questioning lists when I went in and out of countries. And it wasn't a huge deal to me, pre-2019, pre-2020, if I got banned from a country, because it's like I've got home. I've got my friends overseas can come and visit me, right? But when I got married and had a kid, I suddenly had this tie to an overseas country, Australia, where the people I loved and the family I wanted to have was there. And if I wanted to be able to travel between Australia and Canada, where my family members were, my family, like my core family, my parents, my sister, and, a family I'd married into, well, I needed to have the ability to travel back and forth, right? And that part, if you've watched a few of my older videos on this, I've discussed how the Australian government made me quit politics in order to be able to immigrate there whatsoever. So I just had to shut down, my channel and everything I was doing in order to live there. When COVID hit, 2020, 2019, 2020, whenever it was, they got rid of a ton of flights between Australia and Canada. And, my options for which countries I could travel through almost completely disappeared. It became, there was like one flight out of Los Angeles that was like a connector flight to Australia that I could take. And I when I was visiting my family back home and trying to get back to Australia in those early days, I kept trying to book this flight through Los Angeles. But every time I would show up at the airport, they would just sit there and question me for hours and hours and hours and hours as I had a newborn baby. And I kept missing my flights, and I didn't have that much money, right? These are flights during COVID. They're costing $5,000 to $8,000 for these international flights because there's so few of them. And I don't have that kind of money to spend, right? So every time I'm going in and they're questioning me for hours and I'm missing my flight, it's like, literally, this is my fate on the line, like my ability to see my family, to repair my marriage, to work on things. It was horrific. All I'm wanting to do is ensure that, guys, I've quit politics. Please, just let me be with my family. Please let me see my family. And every time I would go through, they would have the same kind of similar set of questions. And a lot of them would be about Martin and Brittany.
Wow. I mean, imagine you're in her situation. Imagine you are a mother, you are a wife, and your family is overseas. And the only way you can really build bonds with your family, the only way you can really build community with your kids is by going over there and seeing them physically. And the governments of those countries refuse to do so simply because you associate with people who have the wrong political views in their viewpoint. We'll discuss the significance of all this in a second. But I want to also hone in on something that Southern said that's a little bit unrelated to her personal woes, but is more indicative of the general condition of our political conversation that I myself have railed on numerous times that all of these take seriously. Here is her talking about how the reaction culture of the political right and all these big content creators is not actually moving the needle on fighting these kind of insidious things. Go.
And I guess that's why sometimes it's so hard for me to watch the culture war stuff online, reacting to TikToks, and I get so tired of it, is because I know that if people were really making a big difference, if they were really pushing things, I know what the government would be doing to them because I've experienced it and I've seen what they do to people like Brittany and Martin who really, really have pushed for certain ideas. And I don't see a lot of people in the political space experiencing those things. Some people do for sure, but I don't see a lot of the bigger figures experiencing those things.
Now, on this point, she's absolutely correct. A lot of content creators, especially on the right, are far more interested in covering drama, what happened with Candace Owens or the Daily Wire, more than they are actually chasing substantive issues and cultural problems that are producing political errors. And when you have a culture of mass distraction, where people who have the most influence have the least knowledge, then you ultimately have a culture that is prone to tyrants who oftentimes have more knowledge than the average person. Look at the IQs and the education of those who happen to be in power. But not only that, you get a culture that is fundamentally lacking introspection because the meaning and value all come from these external stimuli that's outside of the person, outside of the individual realm, and involves all these different personalities and abstract concepts and institutions, all of which distract us on a personal level as well. So you have distraction on a societal level and distraction on a personal level, which creates a culture that tyrants love because they can easily just take it over with their propaganda and people won't really fight back. But it also creates a culture of people that believe they're fighting the good fight against anti-civilizational forces in the case of the right. But when in reality, they are doing nothing more than reacting to the shadows on the walls as people in Plato's era in the cave were. They think they're seeing the world, but they're seeing nothing more than the stage play put before them by this culture of mass distraction for them to see. Southern has always been substantive in the sense that she, as a commentator, as a career person, hasn't really been involved in that culture of mass distraction. And to reach the level of eminence and prominence that she has without biting that mediocre bullet is phenomenal, it is exceptional, and it should be praised for what it is. But now generally, let's go back to the issue of Brittany and Martin. Now, Generation Identity, which is the group that Brittany and Martin were associated with, and it's the group that Southern met them through, apparently, was banned in France. It has a particular reputation across Europe. It was banned in France for being a far-right anti-migrant group. And France actually explained the ban by saying that, and I'm quoting from a French official here, that as detailed in the degree I submitted, it incites discrimination, hatred, and violence. Now, discrimination towards whom? Violence towards whom? How is it inciting these things? Now, here's the thing. Whenever you see anyone, I don't care if they're in power, I don't care if they're in social power, I don't care if they're in your own family, whenever anyone tries to justify an outwardly immoral action, which is censorship, by appealing to things that moral and thinking people would be captivated by and would respond well to, like not wanting violence to flourish in society, you should always be aware of what is happening. More often than not, I'm not asking you to be cynical, but more often than not, this is an approach that even the most astute minds can become disrupted by. This is why some people will say, well, the First Amendment is not absolute. You don't have the right to incite violence, so free speech must be limited. Ha ha ha. Well, if we understand speech in the context of the human being and in the context of proper moral action, then it has to be absolute. If we understand speech as the faculty which produces communication between human beings, makes civilization possible, makes the quest for truth possible, makes the pursuit of philosophy and higher meaning possible, then anything that would seek to tear down human interaction, that would seek to tear down society, that would seek to tear down the human, such as violence, wouldn't be in that category in the first place. So when you really say that incitement is not free speech, you're making a category distinction there, but you're doing it in a sly way. Free speech has nothing to do with calling for violence. It has everything to do with building bridges and connections and understanding with your fellow man. But folks will oftentimes take the idea that there is no absolute right on the basis of a category error. Do you believe category errors? Check that in your own personal time, but it's something that I wish to present to you because that is one of the reasons why so many smart people believe absolutely stupid crap. Different rant, different day. But whenever you see people using this kind of manipulation of language, you should really look out. The reason why Generation Identity, in all honesty, was castigated by the French government and by other governments is because Generation Identity, broadly speaking, is a group that seeks to preserve the cultures of their native countries against mass migration. Now, whenever a particular political disposition becomes hostile towards the dominant interests of a certain political structure, they will do their best to label you in a way that makes you seem as if you are a hateful person. They will attack the character without actually engaging with the content of your words and your beliefs. To be anti-migrant in France, a country that has unfortunately suffered at the hands of a cultural project of multiculturalism, which has convinced the entire French people and convinced Macron, who wasn't initially on board with this, but eventually became on board with this through some reason which just betrays me, convince them that they have a moral obligation to take care of all of the Middle East's problems, and if they don't, they are bigots, which has led to entire parts of France being colonized by foreign gangs that do turf wars in the middle of the street. It has led to social discohesion in France. It has led to so many terrible things, and yet people that recognize this and say, we have to fight against this, they are considered to be far right and evil not because they actually are, but because by proximity, they can be associated with people that may actually have unsavory opinions to someone simply because they're different. You can blur the lines between morally convicted positions that have grounding in truth and have grounding in reason and mere prejudice, which aesthetically appears similar to the moral convictions, but in all reality are not similar because so many people will be duped by that because so many people conflate what things look like with what things are. Or in a fancy way, they can inflate aesthetics with the substance of something. When you do this, you embark on a grave error. An error that is defiling the truth, an error that is defiling to your reason, and an error that leaves you vulnerable to falsehood on so many levels, including on the political level where you are being manipulated consistently by people that are counting on you to engage in falsehood. The attack on Lauren Southern, let me calm down. The attack on Lauren Southern is an attack on 4 levels. It's an attack on the personal level. Now, this is the more obvious point. It's obvious to me that the governments of the United States and Australia were trying to signal to her that these are positions that are so alien to us and that are so despised by us that if you dare hold them, we will hold you from seeing your family. Most of which are, according to the Southern, are in Australia. And when you can have someone associate a moral conviction with pain, most of the time, a human being that associates something with pain will avoid it. Now, let me be clear here. I do not believe that human beings are simply blind moral agents that seek to get pleasure and avoid pain. That was a very, very simplistic and emaciated view of the human being that has prevailed for a very long time and has created a bunch of moral assumptions that are fundamentally had no foundation to them. But I do believe that most people don't like pain. It's not something that we actively seek out. So if you can associate personally with someone holding a moral conviction with some level of pain, they'll avoid it. And that's what happened to Southern. Because she even admits in the video, yes, I will stop talking about politics. I will be quiet. I will not do any more documentaries. I will not speak out against the migration crisis because I want to see my family. So it's an attack on that level. But then it's an attack on the categorical level. Okay, how do we do this? So categories, my friends, are simply ways that we can associate things that are like each other into one umbrella, and we can understand them through strict definitions. So the category that people are attacking by punishing one content creator, not even for what she said, but for her association with other people who they don't like, is they're attacking the category of content creators that might be like-minded to Southern in the first place. If you can attack one content creator who has connections to viewpoints that people don't like, you can then also, by consequence, attack every other content creator who is like-minded. So it wasn't really just a personal attack on Southern, it was a personal attack on every right-leaning person, or any person in general, that cares about the purity and the preservation of their culture and social cohesion, and who had the gall to create a YouTube channel or a Twitter channel to speak about it so they could be silenced. You see, the personal is oftentimes a gateway into the general. Because only through people can ethics happen. Only through people can the truth be revealed, because a person has to think and reason and argue to get to the truth. So Lauren was the gateway for authority and power to get into a place where others would be discouraged from speaking out. That's the categorical attack. Then there's the social attack. Forget content creators. When it comes to this kind of stuff, the ultimate goal is to attack those who the content creators actually influence. What do I mean? People like Southern or whoever, who have big audiences, who are influencing emergent political movements across the West. Their audiences are the primary reason they are a threat. If they had like one subscriber, there would be no effort wasted on them whatsoever. But when you have 100,000 subscribers, that to the set of people in power who only see numbers and don't see substance, that is enough to come after you. But they wish to get the masses. But to get the masses, they have to go through who the masses are listening to. So they have to go through you to get to the masses. So it's also an attempt to make like-minded people in general silent, or at least in a place where they don't have the tools to go on and confront this evil. But then there's another attack, and this is the more important one, a fourth attack. This is the fundamental attack on philosophy. The question of opposing migration or being skeptical about immigration or whatever, regardless of how you feel, the question is very simple. What role does cohesion have in a country? Is diversity a moral good? Are there cases where it could be bad? Should all cultures be treated equally? Or are there cultures that are objectively better than the other culture? There are so many different questions, moral questions, philosophical questions, that when one sits down and thinks of the issue of mass migration and the various political and moral dynamics that it carries, you can go into so many different places. But the problem is, the instinctual place that a lot of people who are connected to the land that they were born in, who are connected to the idea of their nation, who are a fan of the traditions of their country, the instinctual place is going to be one that is resistant to the multicultural project. And because the instinct of people that are connected to their country will be resistant to that, there are only a few ways to actually make those ideas, that connection, that patriotism, that love that would then translate into something that is not beneficial to the project to make it so that is not the case. You would have to either, one, do what I said, attack the people who those people listen to and use propaganda to weaken their spirit, to weaken their understanding of their country, and to deceive them into opening themselves up to all kind of unknown things. Or you can associate even thinking about the topic with a prospect of harm or a prospect of social alienation. So many people who hold certain beliefs are considered to be bigots, they're considered to be xenophobes in this case, or whatever. Part of that is just the organic outgrowth of people that are ignorant and don't have an understanding what those words actually mean and simply wish to use those words to shut down beliefs that make them uncomfortable. But another part of that same aspect, you guys hearing me? Another part of that same aspect is an attempt to use the idea of reputation and the importance of reputation in society to weaponize it against people, to make them feel as if they are crazy, to make them feel as if they are in the wrong side, and to make them feel as if they are a bad person. This way, you can get rid of an idea or a belief system or ideology by proximity without ever having to address the idea in general. This is how authority generally handles ideas it does not like. If it can't get rid of the people that are saying the ideas, if it can't impact people directly, quite simple, I will simply make it the worst possible thing for you in your society to believe the idea. It's an attack on a philosophical level because it prioritizes using force, it prioritizes using manipulation to shut down consideration of ideas, as opposed to simply using one's voice and one's reason to dispute or confute certain ideas. The attack on Lauren Southern is really an attack on everyone else. Because what's happening here is the fundamental natural right to speak, to express yourself, and the fundamental natural right to be heard in a peaceful way. That's being obstructed because some powers and some forces do not benefit from it. And in fact, they are actually hurt greatly for it. There is no more consideration within our culture of the dynamics of this kind of stuff. People are far too focused on what did this crazy blue-haired TikToker said, and they're not focused on enough what's actually going on in my society. I encourage all of you to go check out Lauren Southern's story. But I also encourage all of you to take out the mantle of free thought, and I mean that sincerely. Take out the mantle of first principles and philosophy. Study this nation's history, and if you're in America, or study the history of your own country if you're somewhere else. Learn to appreciate it. Revel in it. I'm not saying be a blind nationalist or whatever, although I'm a civic nationalist myself. But I am saying have an intelligible and rational love for your nation, because a true affection for your nation is one of the key ways you can preserve it from tyrants and cultural narrative agents who would seek to sick certain projects upon your nation that ultimately don't benefit you or don't benefit anyone else except those institutions that wish to see a new society, a worse society, created. And affection for what your country truly is can stop your country from turning into something that it absolutely is not. May these lessons hopefully settle on your minds and your hearts, and may they inform all of us of what we are actually dealing with here when we go out to make a change. My friends, study history, study philosophy, remain morally convicted, donate to me, like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Help us make this channel successful. And please, most importantly, stay pensive, my friends. Bye-bye.